And yeah, thanks for sticking out this course and working on your marriages. I think it's the most beautiful thing that you can do. And yeah, this is where it's at. Yeah, the real reflection of I think what we are supposed to be as humans is in our marriages. And if we can fight for our marriages and if we can make our marriages work, we can make any relationship work in our lives. And this is really the fire that opens up the doors of the world to us if we can get this right. So yeah, let's get into it. So today we are obviously speaking about a really cool topic, and that's conflict within the context of marriage. So everyone goes through it. We recently had friends, newlyweds, and I asked the questions: have you had your first fight yet? They were. It was actually before they were married. No, we never fight, not a chance. Like I didn't even know how people fight or why they fight. So I was like, okay, cool. Let me just let you know now it's going to happen. He was like, oh, whatever. We are perfect for each other. We are like this perfect fit. Anyways, marriage came, and not too long after that, the first fight happened. And it was like, oh my word, what's going on? So the one thing we all have to deal with in any relationship, whether it be a marriage relationship, a work relationship, friendships, relationships with our kids, is conflict. So we want to delve into conflict, what that looks like. And I think the first important thing to note is conflict is not a bad thing. So conflict in the context of marriage, it really isn't a bad thing. I think it's a really good thing because when it comes, but what often happens is the way we deal with a conflict can end up being a really bad thing. So, I mean, that can lead to anger, aggression, intimidation, withdrawal, tension, distancing from one another, and that's where all the hurt and pain comes in within the context of conflict within our marriages. Yeah, so there are ways, and what we want to go over tonight is how do we deal with conflict when it occurs in our marriages? What are some of the tools that we can use?
Hello, everybody. It's lovely to have you with us again. I have to say that in the middle of printing our notes, the printer ink ran out. It's not a really good time to have the printer ink run out when you cannot go and get ink anywhere. I was thinking that Walton should have been on the essentials list, especially with all this homeschooling we are doing. There are certain things that you need at this time and you can't get them. So we are sharing our notes. I apologize if we are looking like we are looking at some paper, but we have to share today. The first thing I wanted to say is the definition of conflict. And this is just your general dictionary definition. And it says there tension, strains, quarrels, contentions that come up with the needs when the needs, habits, and drives of one partner are at cross purposes or opposite to the other. So conflict only comes up when our opinions and our needs don't match. Unfortunately, God made us all individual with our own minds and our own feelings. So we can't just get married and everything's all hunky-dory. We all feel the same. We are going to have different opinions about things at some stage. So marriage has the greatest potential for conflict to arrive because you've got these two people who come from different backgrounds, who come with their own ideas, and they're now starting to live in one house together, live under the same roof. I can remember one of the biggest issues we had was where the toothpaste got squeezed at. And before even where it got squeezed at was
What type of toothpaste?
Yes, was it Colgate or was it Aquafresh? Because Sean's family grew up with Colgate and I grew up with Aquafresh, and Aquafresh is definitely superior to Colgate. So we had interesting discussion around that, and then it basically turned out that I won because I did the shopping and I didn't buy the Colgate. But little things start straight away because we've come with our different opinions, our different views, our different lifestyle, the way that we do things, and we bring it into our marriage. And then a big drama erupts for the first time and then for many times after that. So there are different areas of possible conflict which Sean's going to run through with us.
So it'll be interesting just to settle this dispute once and for all. Let us know in the comments, are you guys Colgate or are you Aquafresh or are you something else? So what is the...
Aquafresh.
You supporting me now?
I support Aquafresh. You bought Colgate.
Okay, well,
Look, I've trained him so well, he's forgotten which one.
I don't know. I just say yes to anything now. I've just learned how to say yes. I'm just kidding. Okay, so here are some of the areas of possible conflict that you could face, and one being personal habits, and that can be, I won't go too much into that, but looking,
Leaving your underpants next to the bed at night.
I can make a perfectly rolled figure of 8 with my underpants. So that is my party trick. Most of my mates know me for that in the diving days. I used to throw my 8 at them. And obviously different tastes. Lindsay went into that now, just around not just toothpaste, but it could be food, it could be styling at home, your social habits. So this was a big one for us. Lindsay and I grew up in two very different places. Her idea of manners and my idea of manners were very different. What was right and what was wrong? None really. It was just really how we were brought up. But together we had to work through that conflict to be able to come up with our own idea of what that looks like.
Yes, Melissa says Aquafresh rules. Yes.
Whatever, Melissa. Household management. So how we look after the house, roles and responsibilities, who takes out the rubbish, who washes the dishes, who washes the clothes, how do you decide on that stuff? And often we come in with preconceived ideas of what that looks like. A little silly example for us is pouring the drinks. So in my household growing up, my mom used to offer everyone drinks. In Lindsay's household, the man would always offer everyone drinks. So, Lindsay was always like, why aren't you offering our guests drinks? So I'm like, well, look, why aren't you offering them drinks?
We had to work that out.
We had to work that out. But just a little real basic example of what can make you frustrated. And there might be some of these things we're mentioning tonight that you haven't ever dealt with. So constantly you're feeling these frustrations around it. And while we went with the communication, the first two sessions was, well, if you're now feeling this stuff or you're getting frustrated about these things now, you can actually go and engage and have the conversations. Money and decision making, absolutely massive. What do we spend our money on? Budgeting. Sometimes one person just eventually takes control because it's such a big thing, but we can really work through these things really well together as families. Sexual problems. So just ideas around what is right, what's not right. I mean, we'll speak more about sexuality next week. So I won't go too much into that, but it's a massive area of contention and conflict. Brokenness within that context as well can lead to massive conflict. Moodiness. Guys, this is a rough one, eh?
I'm never moody.
Yeah, girls are never moody, eh? But yeah, I mean, it's a real thing that happens. And not just, I don't think just girls are moody. Guys are also moody. Sometimes we think we're not, but we are. In-laws. Glynis is watching, so I've got to be careful, eh? I love my mother-in-law. But initially that can be a massive area of conflict, especially when you're first married and you're going through, all of a sudden mom's child is not in her home anymore. All of a sudden I'm not listening to my mom anymore. I'm my own man. And that comes into our marriage and can cause conflict. So it's good to talk about that stuff. Not spending enough quality time together often leads to conflicts. We're just missing each other. We've got very busy lives, and then that ends up with conflict. Issues with the children, how we discipline the children. Massive one. Again, we have very different opinions from how we grew up, where we grew up. We have different ideas about them. It's all stuff we've got to have conversations about. Then there's some other areas that sort of emphasize or add on to that, and that's like our defense mechanisms that we all carry different types of defense mechanisms. And when we're anxious, we want to protect ourselves. It's a natural thing that happens within us. So some of the things we can do when conflict comes, and this is my speciality, is humor and distraction. So a massive conflict starts happening, I can feel it building up, I'll break a joke or I'll laugh or I'll make a comment. But really what I'm trying to do is distract from that conversation and not really face it head on and deal with what's ever happening. Not to say that you can't have humor, whatever, but deal with the issue at hand. Denial, just totally denying that there is a problem. Anger. So if you have this boiling anger, there's generally something deeper down inside that hasn't been dealt with or hasn't been spoken about, and that can often be a defense mechanism. If I just blow up in anger, my wife is going to leave me alone, or she's not going to have the conversation with me. Or if I just freak out, she's going to withdraw. So it's an easy fix for now, but has massive ramifications later. Withdrawal, that's an amazing one. Just conflict arise, I just don't say anything, and I just pretend it's going to go away. I withdraw, keep quiet, don't contribute, and the less I say, the better it's going to go for me. Another way of just not dealing with the conflict at hand. Projection, and that's putting someone else, putting on someone else what you're doing or feeling. And displacement, taking it out on someone else. So you might be feeling an issue somewhere else, but you're taking it out on your spouse. Or feeling something personal inside yourself that you're battling with, but you're taking it out on your spouse. And then suppression. And that's just not dealing with the stuff that you're feeling inside. And again, all these things doesn't help us resolve conflict. So this is how we avoid dealing with conflict, by putting in these defense mechanisms. And so when those defense mechanisms come into play, it's difficult to solve conflict because the barriers are up. We are stopping the conflict from taking a whole conversation to deal with what's actually going on under the surface. Our hearts are closed. So the point here is recognize what it is that you're doing. So are you using humor to detract? Are you denying what's happening? Do you battle with anger, or do you use anger as a tool to stop conflict? Are you withdraw? Do you withdraw into yourself and you just don't ever say anything? Do you project? Do you use displacement or suppression? So that's the first little bit.
Yeah. Okay, so to move on, we're going to talk about unhelpful habits that lead to conflict. And then after that, we'll talk about, okay, so how do we have conflict well? How do we land up in a space when we both have different opinions and we can't come to an agreement? How can we do that so that there is connection and not separation at the end? So unhelpful habits, there's quite a few of them on the notes that Wally and Shirley Gertzmeyer have shared with us. We're so grateful for their marriage course. It has really changed and helped us in our communication, and that's why we're sharing it with you today. So we're going to go over them quite quickly. So we do encourage you to read the notes when we send them, because there is so much amazing information in them that is really helpful. So the first unhelpful habit, which does lead to conflict, is scorekeeping. And this is very self-explanatory, but basically a tit-for-tat trading of favors and duties. So you did this to me, so I'm going to do that to you. Or you didn't do this for me, so I'm not going to do something for you. And just basically, instead of using the lens of me before you, it's actually all about what you can do for me. And if you don't do something for me, forget it. I'm not going to do it back for you or do anything for you, for that matter, which we know from our previous sessions that is not helpful in marriage, and that is actually not the purpose of marriage, to benefit ourselves. The purpose of marriage is to benefit the other person and do everything we can to aid them and help them become who they're supposed to be. So scorekeeping is really unhelpful. It creates an unsafe place within the marriage, and it does lead to there being little room for intimate communication, because every time I bring something up, my spouse says, but you remember you did this, and sends it back. And that leads us on to fault finding. We all know about fault finding. It's very easy in conflict to find a fault with your spouse. But what we're talking about here is a spouse who is constantly finding the negative in their spouse. They're never looking at the positives. The negatives are just completely overwhelming and huge, and you can't see past it. And you spend the whole time picking up your partner's flaws and imperfections, rather than picking up the value and the things that they are really good at and that you love about them. And this often happens, or how you can tell if you are like this, is that you'll find that you're often telling your husband or your wife what he or she is doing wrong, or what you don't like about what they're doing. And you find it's very easy to write a list of faults as opposed to write down the positives or good characteristics about them. And what this leads to in a marriage is feelings of rejection. Feelings of rejection can become a big problem for the person who is in the receiving end of the fault finding all the time. And when rejection happens, we then find that there's avoidance of any conflicts. Because why would you want to bring up something or communicate something with a spouse who's constantly saying, but you're bad at this or you're bad at that? All you want to do is actually disappear into the wall and stay out of their way and hopefully go unnoticed. And then number 3 is a dominating spouse. This is someone who says my way or the highway. This spouse needs to be in control and is not happy unless what we are doing is my decision and if the outcome is the thing that I thought was best. This spouse is not open to their partner's initiatives, their ideas. This is the kind of person who says, we will not end this confrontation until you tell me that I'm right and you are wrong. So often you'll find that somebody in this pattern of conflict will fight to the bitter end and keep going until eventually their spouse crumbles and says, okay, I'm sorry, you are right. And this is basically a form of bullying that doesn't bring the connection we are fostering or we're looking for from communication. It actually just breaks someone down. Often you'll put your own ego above the welfare of the relationship, which is, and sometimes we can do this without even realizing all these things. So we can all sit here and say, but I would never be dominating. That's not who I am. But often these things creep in little by little without us realizing. So it's good to think, is this me? Do I do this sometimes? And this often results in a parent-child or student-teacher relationship. And that is so unhelpful. It's not the way that God designed marriage to be. We are partners, we are equal, and there should never be this feeling of, oh, you the parent and I'm the child. It's a really tricky one, this one.
That's brilliant. And again, like, if we go into all these things, it's so and what we've been saying over and over and over, and I'll have to repeat it again, is that lens of you before me. So if we place that lens on the context of everything in our marriage, so if I'm thinking, okay, before I do anything, it's my spouse before me, then a lot of these habits will start working their way out. And if you ask that question over what you do, so even as we're going through some of this stuff, you might be thinking, oh, flip, that's me. That's okay. It's okay if that's you now. And that's why we're having these conversations, because even when Lindsay and I go through these things, we were giggling and laughing because some of this stuff is us as well. And we have to identify it, continually go over it, and change our habits so that we can have healthy, wholesome conversations. So another way that, another unhelpful habit which leads to conflict is intimidation. And this is where the person or partner attacks the other one. So a good example, we're standing and Lindsay's saying, geez, the dustbin's full again and can't you take it out? I love using the example. It's my favorite one. It's getting old now, but I'll keep using it. The rubbish. It's getting full again, and then I would just turn around and say, what is wrong with you? You're constantly criticizing me. I hate it. You just nya the whole time. And straight away, Lindsay is backing off, like, oh, flip, her husband's reacting, overreacting, starts saying terrible things about her. There's anger and frustration. So your tongue becomes this incredible vicious weapon, which, yes, it stops the conflict or stops your wife potentially or your husband potentially from continuing on that line that they were, but what it does is it really hurts them and creates separation in the long run. So often what you'll find with an intimidating type of behavior is you're often raising your voice. And sometimes you don't even know that you're doing it. And if you're the spouse on the receiving end, maybe what goes through your mind is like, I wish I could record this conversation and play it back to them later. Because if they only knew how they were speaking to me right now. And that's that whole intimidating relationship. Yep.
Just one little thing to add there is that often the intimidating person or the person playing the intimidator in a relationship will use belittling words or name calling and bad language. So it's subtle, and also this person has learned subtle little things that they can say that really cuts deep to the opposite person. So maybe a little weakness that the one spouse has, and they will just press on that button over and over again because they know that it will cause problems and possibly end the conflict.
Yeah. And again with this is Lindsay just going to go sort the dog out quickly that's barking. She'll be back now. But again with that intimidating partner, bad conflict is short term it's cool or good for you personally, the intimidator, because the person stops nagging or stops doing whatever it is that they are doing to irritate you. And we can do it with our kids as well. They irritate, and then we raise our voices and we get highly aggressive and we intimidate them. And all that does is it leads to disconnection. It leads to your spouse never wanting to bring anything up. It leads to your spouse never ever wanting to have conversations. So instead of what we've been saying, we want to do things that draw us together, it actually pushes us apart. So it's a very negative way. The next one is the manipulator, and this is the clever fighter, the spouse, whoever who says the right things in the right way to get someone on your side. So it's to get something from your partner to make them do what you want to do, to change their thinking to your way. So again, this is quite a selfish behavior. Your intention around your conflict is to constantly get them on your side, or say things in such a way that they eventually end up on your side, and using the past and using a whole bunch of things. So you place sometimes condemnation and guilt on the other partner in this. So, for instance, the rubbish not being taken out, it's like, you know what, you never help me with this. I'm always the one doing this, and my hand's really sore, or I'm really tired, and I've done this, and I've been a whole through that. All of a sudden, the person starts feeling really guilty, and like, oh, you know what, it's okay, I'll do it today, and I'll do it. So you're getting them to constantly do things by playing that part. So your partner feels paralyzed by guilt, and therefore we use that guilt to control our spouse or partner.
Just one thing on manipulation is that the Bible is actually quite clear about manipulation, and it says that manipulation is like witchcraft. Manipulation is an incredibly dangerous space to get into, and we can also we can be very clever in the way that we manipulate people, and it can be quite subtle sometimes, where we can say things in order to get people to do what we want. And it's such a good example, but it's flown out of my head. No, it wasn't that. But another way of doing it is actually through non-verbal communication. So through the way that you use your body, things like withholding sex or withholding communication, things like that are also a form of manipulation. Saying things like, everyone else is saying this, or everyone else is doing this, so you should be doing it first. So this is an area that we really need to be careful of, because it is a very powerful tool, and it can be very damaging to relationships, any relationship for that matter, not just in marriages.
Yeah. So some of the things you can use to manipulate, and that's withholding sex, withholding conversation, just withholding emotionally to your partner, and using that to manipulate them into doing what you want. And then the next bad habit is self-absorption. And this is really the bottomless pit. And that's the person who constantly wants to look good. So I constantly need to look good in front of my spouse. I constantly need to look good in front of my kids. I constantly need to look good in front of my peers. I constantly need to look good in front of my workmates. And no matter what they do, or no matter what your spouse does, it's never good enough. So it's quite a position of low self-esteem. So you talk about your friendships and your relationships because you think the person is out of your league. Yeah, so you talk yourself out of it. And again, this is just a terrible place to be in, where everything is about you, the whole world is about you, and everything everyone does is pointed at you. So it's a very self-absorbed place to be.
Yeah, the thing about the self-absorption is that actually you have a very poor self-image or worth of yourself. You don't think that you're good enough to be with your spouse. You don't think that you will ever be good enough to have friends or ever be good enough to have relationships. So you find that it's quite an exhausting place to be, because the spouse who is on the receiving end is spending the whole time lifting you up, building you up, telling you you are good enough, you are beautiful, you do deserve to be loved by me. Often in a conflict situation, the spouse will just break down and say, oh, it's all my fault, instead of actually moving further and pushing further into the feelings and being able to break through that conversation. It ends there, and they just fall apart into pieces and really truly believe that everything is their fault. So it can be quite frustrating for the person on the other hand, because they never break through and they're always building that person up, and then it's exhausting for the person who's feeling that, because they never feel good enough. They never feel like what they have to say has something to offer. And so this can be quite a tiresome relationship to be in. And my if you find that this is you, or you have aspects, or you've seen this in your life before, my biggest plea to you is that you need to work on looking inside yourself and finding out who you are, who have I been created to be, and work on your inner self before you start having communication with your spouse, so that you can have a communication that ends in connection rather than in conflict, or half a communication that solves nothing.
Yeah. And then the last one is comfortability, and that's like don't rock the boat. So that's in the relationship where you just it's an unengaging place to be. So your spouse comes up, I know you're right, yeah, I'll change, I'll do that, and no matter what they say, you never ever really deeply engage in conflict because you don't want to rock the boat. And these are generally people who don't like conflict, or don't like to handle conflict, or have maybe in their past been hurt by conflict, and that's your way of escaping it, is by not rocking the boat, or just being just doing what your spouse says. So whenever a tough situation comes, it's like, no, you're right, you're always right. And again, that's a very frustrating place for the other party who wants to potentially deal with something, but you always say, no, you're right, but you never end up changing your behavior because you're not really dealing with the issue.
Often in this setting, we've found this sometimes in our own relationship, where we can be vulnerable enough to share that with you. And often what happens in this situation is that the person who is not willing to have the conflict, or to go there within the communication, makes his spouse in this instance feel uncared for. It's the feeling is, actually, you don't care enough about me, and you don't care enough about this marriage to have this hard conversation. You just want to sit in the status quo. Let's just carry on because you don't care. And it's actually not the truth. So often, if we hide behind comfortableness, we don't want to fight, let's just pretend nothing's wrong and carry on, we cause deep hurts underneath, which actually creates more conflicts and communication barrier in the end. So sometimes it's just so much better to sit down and use those communication tools we've already taught you, and have a proper conversation about something, than to just leave it. It makes it worse.
So if I take that lens that we spoke about earlier, about you before me, and we go through every single one of these bad conflict ideas. So comfortability. Well, if I'm a person who builds up walls and I'm thinking of my spouse, I need to say, you know what? I need to go deep, and I need to deal with this thing because it's not about me. It's about my wife, wanting to communicate something, wanting to feel noticed and feel like I'm listening to her. Self-absorption. Again, it's not about you. It's about the other party. Manipulator. You don't manipulate because it's not about your idea or where you want to go. It's about the other party. Intimidating. You don't intimidate because you want your spouse to be heard. You want to be able to constantly have the freedom to be able to speak her mind and say what she's wanting to say. You never dominate because, again, it's my spouse before me. Fault finding. We don't find faults in the other. What we do is we start finding faults in ourselves and dealing with our own personal faults, because it's my faultiness which she is reacting to in either anger, frustration, or whatever it might be. And then scorekeeping. We don't keep score because we are forgiving. We're always gracious towards our spouse and saying, actually, no matter what she ever does, I have grace for her and love for her because it's a choice, it's not a feeling.
Yeah, so sure. I'm feeling the heaviness of this chat today. Those are some big things that we've spoken about. And sometimes it can be a bit scary when you think, oh, flip, actually, that could be me. Or most of us are probably going, oh, yes, that's my husband. But there is this bit of weightiness. So I really encourage you over the next while to look at the notes when they come through. Go through it and decide, could this be me? Is there an area I need to change here? Or do I need to have some communication with my spouse? Because I feel that he communicates to me this way. And so that you can move past those barriers and those unhelpful habits, so that you can have conflict or communication that brings connection. So,
sorry, one other thing on that line before we continue is, so if you are on the receiving end, so you're the spouse who maybe you have a dominating or an intimidating spouse. So when it comes to conflict, they raise their voice, they shout, they swear. I want to say this to you as well from your side. So one is the perpetrator, and the other one is the receiver. As a receiver, to be brave, to put on the brave face and say, you know what, regardless how they behave towards me or what they do, I know it's a flaw. I'm gonna choose in this moment to push through and to ask the right questions and to keep on it and keep digging in and keep trying to deal with that particular issue at hand, because instead of backing off, or reacting to how they are communicating.
Okay, yay. So we've got that off our chests, all the things that we're not good at. And now we're going to look at what we need to become good at. What do we need to do to have constant, clear communication? Because constant, clear communication calms conflict. I loved all those C's that Wally and Shirley put in there. Constant, clear communication calms conflicts. So we're going to share a few principles to follow in solving conflicts. How can we now get through this? Because, there's big problems happening. What should we do? And so there's quite a few tips here. Some we're going to brush over quickly because we have discussed them already in the communication section, and some we're going to look at more deeply. So the first one is to learn to identify your emotions and express them before a potential conflict situation arises. And we've talked about this before, identifying what's going on inside of me, what feelings have arisen inside of me, and making sure that you understand what's happening inside of yourself before you start sharing them with your spouse. And then actually setting a date to talk about it before you land up before an incident happens and you land up in a heated debate because this has arisen. So there are times when we are more susceptible and vulnerable and open to being irritable, agitated, angry. And part of this step is also learning to not talk when we are in that space.
Hangry.
Yes. Hangry.
Hangry, you all know about that one.
I suffer from being hungry. If I haven't eaten, I can be a little bit tense. So if you're hungry, if you're sick, are you depressed at the moment? We all know, ladies, we have different cycles that we go through, hormonal changes. Make sure that you're communicating to your spouse through those, and schedule your discussions in a more in peaceful surroundings.
So just on the hormone side, so
are you an expert?
I'm an expert on hormones, pretty much. No, I'm joking. So know where your wife cycles at, for the guys, and have extra grace. So I sort of know when those moments are coming, and I know that my wife is going to battle with emotions during that time. So for me, it's to put on extra grace. It's just to be gracious during those times. I don't need to pick fights now. I don't need to have these massive conversations. I just need to help and be helpful and help her through that process. Why? Because I want her to flourish, and I don't want her to have to feel the pressure of having to deal with everything while she's dealing with emotions.
I have no idea what Sean's talking about. I handle my emotions very, very well. So I'm not sure where that came from. Number 2 is don't bottle up your frustrations. Don't keep everything inside and then freak out all at once about them. It's better to deal with them one at a time and not at all in one swoop. So we don't leave years and years and years and years of frustrations, and then on one day, wham bang, thank you ma'am, Sean and Lindsay said we should talk, so here it comes and it's all coming out at once. We need to learn to express our feelings in a controlled way. So actually, the earlier and the quicker we talk about something, the better. So one of the principles to solving conflicts is actually to talk more. Don't wait for something to really fester and become nasty inside of you. Rather, talk often. Talk about something before it becomes a big deal, so that you can avoid a conflict situation. If your partner's getting angry, don't tell them you're getting angry. Don't get angry. The whole time you have a conversation, talk about how you are feeling, what you are feeling, rather than saying you are this, you are that. So if you want to say something about your partner being angry in a conflict, you can say, have I said something to make you angry? What have I said that's made you angry? Rather than pointing fingers, we really need to learn how to use our words wisely. And number 3, so a principle to follow in solving conflicts is don't use the silent treatment as a weapon to control, frustrate, or manipulate, or even as an easy way out. So important. The silent treatment is not cool and not okay. Normally, the more talkative person likes to talk, and what happens when somebody is giving the silent treatment, they will just talk more because they will talk to try and get their spouse to talk. Often, and here we go again, because this happens in our marriage, the talker will often talk to the point of trying to agitate the spouse enough to get a response because you are just so desperate for some kind of communication from the other side. And I can definitely put my hand up and say, I have done that. It's very bad. But I have pushed and pushed Sean, hoping that I will touch something for him to explode just so that I can get a response. So if you do the silent treatment, there's going to be conflict. So avoid it and rather allow the communication to happen. Another one is don't displace blame. So this is a big thing. If your spouse is chatting to you about something and wanting to talk, don't say it's because of you or it's because of the dog. I'm cross because the dog, I don't know, ate somebody's lunch, which has happened in this house. Actually, someone's Easter egg got eaten.
My Easter egg.
Yeah.
My golden bunny, nogal.
Lynn's golden bunny, very bad. So admit when you're wrong. It's such a big deal.
Did you eat it?
No, I did not eat the bunny. It was the
I
dog.
thought you're confessing here. I'm like, what?
No, admit if you are wrong. Don't come up with excuses. If you have made a mistake or you know that you've done something, just say you're sorry. It's so much easier. The minute we start displacing blame, we cause conflict. It doesn't solve anything. So in order to have good communication, we don't displace the blame in the conflict. Say I'm sorry, say it quickly, and move on from there. There were 3 things in Wally and Shirley's notes that I absolutely loved, and I want to read them to you so that I don't get them wrong. But basically, we know in Genesis the first recorded argument between husband and wife, between Adam and Eve. And what did they do? Adam said it was
Your fault.
the wife.
Who you gave me.
Yes, who you gave me, God. And then the wife said it was the serpent in the garden. And Wally and Shirley said, when looking for faults, use a mirror and not a telescope. And that's so important, and it just reiterates our lens of you before me. Let me look at myself before I look at my spouse. And then number 2, I just love this. I put it in especially for Sean. Don't criticize your wife's judgment. Remember, she married you. So if she's making bad choices, then she made a bad one with you too. And then the only way to settle a disagreement is on the basis of what's right and not who's right. And that's so important. It's not about who's right. It's not about who's going to be the winner, who's going to be the person on top at the end. It's about how are we going to win this? How is our relationship going to come out on top? And how are we going to stay connected at the end of this discussion?
Yeah.
Oh, thank goodness it's you.
So we're almost done now, and then you can get chatting and get through your conflict at home.
Comments on if you'd like to as well.
Yeah, so if you do have any questions or want to make any comments, you can make them now. We're probably going to be about another 4 or so minutes. So there is a bit of a delay. So if you make the comments now, we'll obviously be able to read them before we do go offline. But yeah, so here are some other little things about not throwing your feelings at your partner. And the ways you can do this sometimes is by saying things like, you never or you always. That's like that super judgment. You never do this or you always do that.
You never take out the rubbish.
Yes, exactly. I'm very hurt by that, by the way. The rubbish has come out a lot in this time. So it's such a good example. I've actually got very good at it
very good. She's very good.
The last little while. So I better keep it that way. Consistency is king, eh? And then the next thing is choose a good time and place to discuss the matter further. So if you are in a situation when you're feeling anger, you're feeling frustrated, you just want to kill each other, it's like, okay, stop the boat. Let's choose a time. Maybe it's an hour later, or after we put the kids to bed, we're gonna sit down, we're gonna have a chat through this conversation, and then follow through with that. So don't just say you're gonna chat and then don't. I gotta say this. I gotta do it in a posh accent as well. So, darling. So this is how we deal with conflict. Darling, is there's something troubling me that I would like us to talk about. Would you like to chat about it now or a more convenient time later? But you'll get the heart of that. So it's I can see something's happening. So it's darling, babes, whatever you call your spouse, your nickname. I can see you're a bit frustrated. Do you want to chat about it now, or would you like to chat about it later? So never let them off the hook. We're going to chat about this, but give the other person the freedom to decide when that's going to happen. And then stay in the present. Don't dig up the past. And that's so easy. Chat about the now. Chat about the situation at hand now, not the 1,000 times they've done it beforehand. And we go back to that comment that we heard. How would you treat someone is if what they did was the first time they ever did it? So how would you discipline your child if what they did was the first time they ever did it? So often our reactions are loaded with so much emotion because we're thinking about the 500 other times they did it. So every time we come into a conflict situation or we're dealing with an emotion, we don't go to the past. We deal with what is happening right now in front of us in a calm, rational manner.
So yeah, just to summarize on those. So what are the principles to follow in solving conflicts? So learn to identify your emotions before you go there. Deal with them, know what they are, know how to express them and what to call them. Don't bottle up your frustrations and leave them to explode. Don't use a silent treatment because that will result in the talker talking more, and that will also land up in an explosion. Don't displace blame, admit when you're wrong. So while you're having the conversation and communication, say I'm sorry. That'll avoid a conflict situation. Try not to use the words you never and you always. Always talk from I feel. This makes me feel. I am feeling this inside of me. It's not actually you, it's me. This is how I'm feeling. And choose a good time and place to discuss the matter. And stay in the present. Don't dig up the past. And I think if we can remember these things and the things we've learned in the previously for how to speak and how to listen, we all have the potential to have great communication and to enjoy connection together. It's something I did want to say is that communication like this takes practice and takes time, and we are definitely not in a guru space yet. So we are still learning, we're still practicing it, and there will be moments when the eruptions do happen and the conflict does come. But the more we do it and the more we actively put into our minds these concepts and we train our brains and we train our emotions and feelings to respond and react this way, the better and easier it will become to talk like this. And to if you do find that you're at loggerheads about something, especially around decision making, often something has to be done at the end of the conversation. If you are at loggerheads, step back and say to yourselves, how are we going to come out of this? We are going to make a decision together. And someone told me in the last 2 weeks, and I can't remember who it is now, but it might have been Mish actually. The person said, if you come to the conversation with two ideas, my idea and Sean's idea, and we are not coming together on those two ideas, go and find the third idea. So go and look for the third option. Option 1 and option 2 is not working. Together, let's find the third option that is going to work.
And then just a last thing about communication in general. So that summarizes the 3 weeks of communication that we have done. If you have sat down and you are going through some of the stuff and you are trying and you just can't seem to get it right, or you really, really battling, sometimes what's really helpful is just to go sit with someone. Go and sit with someone maybe for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, maybe once a week, and bring some of those big conversations where there are other parties that are maybe good at dealing with conflict, or you've seen in them that they generally great at dealing with conflict. Yeah, they might fight, but they always get over it and they always sort it out. Go sit with them. It's so often helpful when someone else is there. It diffuses a lot of those things, the anger issues and some of the stuff that blocks us. And maybe some of that stuff does happen. It's easier for an outside person to point it out or say something than you to be able to say that to your spouse. Yeah.